Advertiser minimum budgets. Advertiser minimum budgets are something that's been around basically since the start of Facebook. It's one of those things I'm actually shocked they've kept all these years. Not really since the start, but about 8 years or so, I believe it was introduced. And in this quick video, I just want to reiterate their importance and what you could potentially do with them. The reason I bring this up as a standalone video is because I've brought it up probably like 15 times throughout this program. But I think it's just important for us to be able to go back easily and reference when to use these. So first things first, what the heck am I talking about? If we go into any ad set in any campaign that is maximize conversions, not maximize conversion value, I don't think, you are able to go to your budget strategy and click on ad set spending limits. Your ad set spending limits then allow you to set a daily minimum or a daily maximum. Now you could use these in all sorts of scenarios. I'm going to give you the scenario for prospecting and then the scenario for retargeting slash retention. The reason there's two different scenarios or two different breakouts here is because one is about setting minimums and the other is about setting maximums. So for setting minimums first in prospecting CBO, the main reason you want to use an advertising minimum is to force budget into a certain spot. Now, I want you to proceed with extreme caution. There's a lot of folks who are going to see this and say, all right, we got to set our minimums and that's that. And then what they'll wind up doing is they're going to die by 1,000 paper cuts. They're going to have hundreds of ad sets over long periods of time, and they're all going to be forced to spend $50 a day. And then therefore, they don't even have a campaign budget optimization campaign because they're actually just setting everything manually. Here's how you actually properly use them. It's very, very simple. I broke this down recently in another video, and all I basically said was this chart right here, which you may have seen. What on earth is Sam showing in this chart? What I'm basically showing in this chart is that these are multiple different ads that are running, and all we do in the case of an advertising minimum is instead of starting the ad from 0 and hoping that it gets spend, which can take a long time, we start the ad at a advertiser minimum, which ideally gets it spend quicker. The reason it gets it spend quicker is because we set the minimum. So what we set right here, let me just X out of that. What we send right here at the daily minimum is set to once the cost per acquisition. So if your CPA is $100, then your minimum is $100. Now, if that seems like a completely unreasonable thing to do, use your best judgment. Maybe you have to cut it in half, but generally speaking, don't set these unless you can guarantee a purchase every single day against your cost per acquisition. The reason this works very, very nicely is because if you set to $100 instead of 0, where most people start out, most people starting out 0, you wind up spending very little amounts for a lot of days in a row. And then if the ad starts to work, then and only then do things start to pick up. What's beautiful about the advertiser minimum budget is that only a few days need to go by for it to get signals on conversion events because it's spending your CPA, or in the other case, if it's not hitting your conversion target, before it could either spend more or continue to stay at the minimum. So what will either happen here is it'll continue to spend at the minimum threshold, which is an indication that it's a total loser, or it will spend above the threshold, in which case you could actually stop the ad set spending limit. So basically, in either one of these cases, after a week at most, you want to pause the ad set spending limit. You never want to blow through your whole budget every single day and get very few results or better results that could have happened in other places. In addition, you don't want to have these limits in place and minimums in place when they're over. So for example, if your minimum is this $100, but you start to spend $300 a day, you want to remove that minimum because this ad will eventually fatigue and then you will always cap it out at 100. That's a bad move for yourself. So that's scenario number 1. Scenario number 2 is maximums. So if you're running a retargeting or a retention-based campaign, that means that you're targeting a specifically refined amount of people. If you're targeting a refined amount of people, let's say all your existing customers and say 1,000 people over your business's lifetime have purchased from you, or 10,000 people. That means you could only really spend a certain amount against that group of people before you max out. What winds up happening in these scenarios with with max budgets, or when you have multiple ad sets next to each other with or without max budgets, is naturally the audience with the biggest size of cohort gets most of the spend. So for example, if you have all of your existing customers represented in this circle, all of your people who visited your website represented in this circle, and then all the way over here, you have everyone who's ever engaged with you on Instagram in this circle. So this circle might be 5 people, this circle might be 20 people, and this circle might be 200 people. Just keeping this very simple, right? This is 4x and this is 10x. What's going to happen is Facebook's going to distribute, these blue lines are going to be our impressions. Facebook can't distribute the same number of impressions here as it can in here, right? It's going to favor this guy right here. It's going to send way more impressions into this bigger bucket with more people in it. The problem with that is that these audiences right here, your visitors and your add to cart, might be more valuable, might be higher touch. So what you might want to do, if the data shows, is you might want to just put a maximum on some of these bigger audiences, and even potentially put a maximum on some of these smaller audiences. The reason you would put a maximum in place is because, let's say if this audience is smaller and for some reason Facebook says, we like this one because it gets the highest ROAS, but you notice your frequency, so your frequency on this is way too high. Like you're hitting people like 10 times a day or 10 times, 15 times a week, something way too high. We've gone through frequency management in another module, by the way. Then you want to make sure you set that advertiser maximum so you don't overspend on the same audience. That's really the core of this. I've gone through this probably a lot in a lot of different scenarios, so I'm going to keep it at that. And I really hope this helps.